Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go video. Okay, so today we're gonna have a bit of fun. We're gonna be doing a tier list of all of the starter Pokemon in Pokemon Go. I'm going to be ranking all of the evolved forms of every single starter that is currently available in Pokemon Go based on their overall usefulness. Some of these Pokemon are going to be really good for raid battles, other Pokemon are going to be good for PvP, and there's a handful of Pokemon that's actually going to be good for every aspect of Pokemon Go. That's what this video is going to be all about, so let's roll the intro and get right into it. Okay, let's jump right into it. So, I have here a tier list ready to go with all of these starter Pokemon, and all of these are basically currently available in Pokemon Go. You can pretty much get any single one of these starters right now. Alright, let's jump into this tier guide. So, first and foremost, I'm going to be going over every single one of these starters. They are actually the ones that are currently available, minus these three right here. These are, of course, the Hisuian versions of these starter Pokemon, and because I feel like we're going to be getting them pretty soon, I decided to add them as kind of like a fun pick that we're going to do at the end. Every single one of these Pokemon are currently available in Pokemon Go, and I'm going to be counting them based on their current moveset. So even though we know that Greninja is likely to get a community day later on this year, I'm only going to be counting Greninja as it currently stands. The same goes for Decidueye, Emboar, and Primarina. So yeah, even though they could be a lot more powerful later on once they receive their Community Day move, I'm only going to count them as they currently are. I mean, eventually in the future, I'll probably do an updated version of this tier list, but as of right now, let's go with the ones that we have. Let's start this off with Venusaur, and this is actually a very interesting case because Venusaur is actually pretty well-rounded. It does have a Mega Evolution, which means it's going to have some relevance in PvE, but of course, it is a mainstay within the Ultra Premier League and the Ultra League. In terms of overall usefulness, I would actually rate it at about a B tier, and that is of course because it is actually useful in PvP and it's somewhat useful in PvE. You can use it for its Mega Evolution bonus, but of course, there's much better grass types out there for raid battles and even a better Mega Evolution, which we'll get into later, but in general, I do think this is a very useful Pokemon. Next up, let's talk about Blastoise, and yeah, we are about to get a Community Day Classic for Squirtle, but unfortunately, this is the weakest out of the three Kanto starters. There's going to be some very specific cases where Blastoise will actually be useful for PvP, but when it comes to PvE, there's a lot of Pokemon out there that are just going to outclass it. Therefore, I'm going to put Blastoise in the D tier. It's not necessarily bad enough where you could put it in the trash tier, but I don't think it's good enough where you will want to put resources into it. Next up, let's talk about Charizard. So, out of the three Kanto starters, I would actually make the argument that Charizard is the absolute best one, and I would go so far as to say it is one of the best when it comes to all of the current starter Pokemon. I'm going to put Charizard in the A tier because this Pokemon is just that good. It is still going to be really good as a raid attacker, and it has a lot of relevance in multiple different leagues in the Go Battle League. So yeah, in my opinion, the A tier is the perfect spot for Charizard. Next up, let's go over Meganium. So this is a starter Pokemon that I would actually put in the C tier. And the reason for that is because it's not necessarily going to be among the best in terms of grass type raid attackers, but it does have some niche uses in PvP. Now for the second Johto starter, we have Feraligatr. This is going to be the first one that I actually put in the trash tier. To this day, I have still not found a legitimate use for this Pokemon. It doesn't have a Mega Evolution, it's not necessarily going to be good in PvP, and it really gets outclassed when it comes to PvE. This is one of those starter Pokemon that you can absolutely ignore. It doesn't even have a really cool shiny, so yeah, for all of you who are Feraligatr fans, I'm sorry to say, it's going to be our first trash tier Pokemon. Alright, now let's talk about Typhlosion. So, this is a starter Pokemon that it does have some niche uses in PvP, especially when it comes to the Ultra League, but in general, it's going to fall in line with Blastoise. I don't necessarily find it useful in a lot of different circumstances, and it doesn't even have a Mega Evolution, so unfortunately, it's going to be a D tier Pokemon. Alright, now let's move on to Gen 3, which in my opinion has the best set of starters out of all of the different generations. First up, we have Sceptile. Now this Pokemon is, without a doubt, our first S tier. Now, the reason why I put it in the S tier is simply because it has the strongest Mega Evolution for grass types currently in the game. It also gains the Dragon typing, which means you have a lot of versatility there. It's also extremely good for other kinds of PvE content like Team Go Rocket leader battles and Team Go Rocket grunt battles, and in general, it's just a super useful Pokemon. I really do think that it is going to be one of your most used Pokemon in the game, even though it has absolutely no relevance in PvP. Now, I'm also going to say the same thing about Blaziken. Blaziken is a Pokemon that I would put in the S tier because of just how useful it is in all varieties of PvE situations. On top of it being the absolute best fire type Mega Evolution currently in the game, it is also one of the best, if not the best, fighting type Mega Evolution as well. Considering there's just so many raids out there that require a good fighting type or a fire type, I would have to say that Blaziken is going to be one of your most used Pokemon in the game. You know what, I'm actually going to make an adjustment here. I'm actually going to move Charizard to the S tier because I actually do think it is one of the best Pokemon in the game in terms of well-roundedness. It's going to be really good for PvE. It does kind of fall behind Blaziken in terms of Mega Evolution bonuses, but it does have a lot of versatility because it has two different kinds of Mega Evolutions. I totally forgot about that fact. And then of course, Charizard is so good for PvP that I just really do not think it deserves to be in an A tier slot. I do think it is actually an S tier Pokemon. Next up, let's talk about Swampert. Now, without a doubt, this is one of the best and one of the most useful Pokemon in the game right now. It is really good for multiple leagues in the Go Battle League. Like, for example, the Great League and Ultra League, it is an absolute menace, but its Mega Evolution is actually extremely good for PvE. Sure, in terms of water types, you will probably want to go with Primal Kyogre, and then in terms of ground types, Primal Groudon, but Swampert is extremely powerful. It's basically a big glass cannon when it comes to raid battles, and it's going to give you a significant amount of damage, while also boosting up water type and ground type damage. Next up, let's go over Torterra. So, this is going to be one of those Pokemon that I'm going to put in the D tier. There's going to be very few instances where you're actually going to use this Pokemon, and it's mainly because its usefulness is primarily in a couple of niche leagues within the Go Battle League. In terms of PvE, I really do not find any situations where Torterra is going to be the absolute best Pokemon in your arsenal. So yeah, unfortunately, it is going to fall in a lower tier bracket, which is going to be the D tier. Alright, next up, we got Infernape. And yeah, for people who are fans of Infernape, like myself, unfortunately, it is going to fall into the trash tier. Just like with Feraligatr, I have yet to find a legitimate use for this Pokemon. It is a very powerful Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be outclassed in just about every aspect of Pokemon Go. And yeah, it doesn't have a Mega Evolution to fall back on. Finally, rounding out this generation, we have Empoleon, and I'm going to move it to the B tier alongside Venusaur. It doesn't have a Mega Evolution just like Venusaur, but I will say that it is pretty strong for PvP. And of course, if you're lacking in any kind of good water type raid damage, Empoleon is actually a pretty useful Pokemon. Alright, next up, we got Serperior, and I'm going to put him in the C tier. Just like with Managium, it is going to have some good uses in PvP, but essentially that's going to be it. It doesn't necessarily have the amount of raid damage that you would want from grass types, and it's not necessarily going to be useful in other aspects of PvE content within Pokemon Go. Finally, we got Emboar, and yeah, this is going to fall in line with the D tier Pokemon. I really do not find any uses for this Pokemon, but it does have some well-rounded stats, so there is potential for it to be useful in PvP. Next up, we got Samurott, and in a very similar vein to Empoleon, it's going to be good in some aspects of PvP. I really do feel like on top of getting Hydro Cannon, it needs some really good moves to make it somewhat more useful. Now that I'm looking at this list, I'm going to make one more edit. I'm going to actually move Venusaur to the A tier. Yeah, in terms of Mega Evolutions, it's going to fall behind Mega Sceptile, but I just feel like I use it a lot more than most of the starter Pokemon in the B tier, so I'm going to shove it up to the A tier. Next up, let's go over Chestnut. So this is a Pokemon that recently got a community day, and it did get a significant improvement from that community day. I've actually used Chestnut quite a lot in some of the specialty cups within the Go Battle League, and I really do think it does have a lot of potential. It does have a very unique type combination of grass and fighting when it comes to the starter Pokemon, and that is something you should definitely utilize. Therefore, I'm gonna actually put Chestnut in the B tier. It is not necessarily going to be as strong as any of the Pokemon up here, but it is definitely going to be more useful than some of the Pokemon down here. Actually, let me make a quick edit. I'm going to actually put it in the C tier, and I'm going to move up Meganium to the B tier, because Meganium is just going to be a little bit more powerful than Chestnut, so I just feel like it just sounds right to switch these two Pokemon. Alright, next up we got Delphox, which is actually the most recent starter to get a community day. I'm going to move this Pokemon to, unfortunately, the D tier. It is not a useful Pokemon by any means. Like, yeah, it might get some niche uses within the Go Battle League, but if you compare it to the Pokemon that are up here, like, I just really do not think it's ever going to be useful compared to other starters. Alright, next up, let's talk about Greninja. So, Greninja is kind of interesting because it is definitely going to be a much more powerful Pokemon once it receives Hydro Cannon, and there's also the caveat that there could be different forms of this Pokemon released in the future. There is a version of Greninja that a lot of players have been anticipating, which is of course Ash's Greninja. I really do think that Pokemon has a chance of being released into Pokemon Go, and I do think it's going to be extremely powerful. For now, I'm going to put it in the C tier because it is a very powerful Pokemon with a lot of damage, but unfortunately until it receives Hydro Cannon, it's not necessarily going to make that much of an impact right now. Next up, let's talk about Decidueye. And of course, this Pokemon still has not yet received a community day, and it's basically kind of like a collector's item at this point. For now, I'm going to put it in the trash tier because there really is no instance where Decidueye is going to be really good. Even with Frenzy Plant, I don't predict it's going to make that much of a significant impact. It does have some pretty good stats, but I just don't think it's ever going to outclass Pokemon like Venusaur or Sceptile or even Serperior. Alright, next up we got Emboar, and I'm actually going to put it in the trash tier for much of the same reasons as Decidueye. I do think this Pokemon has some potential to move up in the ranks later on, and it's all going to depend not just on Blast Burn, but other moves that it could potentially get. Alright, finally, we came to Primarina, and I actually think this Pokemon is deserving of a high spot. I'm actually going to put it in the A tier because, for one, it has a really unique type combination of water and fairy. It is basically going to be a nerfed down version of Tapu Fini or a buffed up version of Azumarill, depending on where you use it. Yeah, it's not ever going to be used in raid battles, and unless of course you do not have good water types, but in terms of PvP, it has a lot of the same usefulness as Venusaur. There's going to be a lot of moments where you will actually find this Pokemon to be a clutch pick. It's not going to rank really high when it comes to the meta, but it is such a useful Pokemon, and it's such a budget Pokemon that you could use in the Ultra League and the Great League that you really cannot ignore this Pokemon. Actually, I forgot that it doesn't have a Mega Evolution, so I'm actually going to put it in the B tier because, yeah, it kind of falls in line with all these other Pokemon. Alright, now for fun, let's go over the 3 Hisuian Pokemon. And of course, these Hisuian starters are not in the game yet, so this is going to be more based on speculation. I actually think that Hisuian Decidueye might fall into the C tier. I actually think it has some potential. Even though its regular form is down here in the trash tier, I actually think Hisuian Decidueye with Frenzy Plant and some really powerful fighting type moves could actually give it a lot of usefulness in the same line as Chestnut. Next up, we got the dark and water type Pokemon Hisuian Samurott. I'm actually going to put it in the D tier, mainly because when it comes to dark and water, there's not a lot of synergy there, so I really do not think this Pokemon is going to see a significant improvement if it ever gets Hydro Cannon, and if it ever even gets released. If you're talking raid type damage, there's a lot of much better water and dark type Pokemon out there, like Gyarados, like Mega Gyarados, and of course there's also Sharpedo, and I really do not know if Hisuian Samurott is going to be able to compete with either of those. And then finally, we got to the last Pokemon that I wanted to add to this tier list. It is of course going to be Hisuian Typhlosion. And yeah, it's pretty much going to fall in line with the D tier for a lot of the same reasons as Hisuian Samurott. So Yeah, there you have it. This is my tier list for all the starter Pokemon. Of course, if we want to only count the Pokemon that are currently released, that would mean that without the Hisuian Pokemon, I'm actually going to move them down here. This is how it would kind of look, and I do think this is pretty accurate. Even with the addition of future Community Day moves, maybe we could see Greninja move up to the A tier, making it one of the best water-type raid attackers without a Mega Evolution, but as of right now, I'm going to move it to the C tier. I think that's the best spot that it currently stands right now. I do see some people using Greninjas in raid battles, and I've occasionally seen them in PvP as well, but until it receives Hydro Cannon, it's basically going to be a C tier Pokemon compared to some of these other Pokemon. So yeah, I'm going to keep it in the S tier as well, because I find myself using Charizard quite a lot in the Ultra League as well as the Great League, so I do think it's deserving to be in the S tier slot. Yeah, I think this is going to be my tier list. I know there's going to be some of you that completely disagree with it, and that's totally fine because this is mostly based on my own personal opinions. But let me know what you think regarding this tier list. How would you tier each of these starter Pokemon? Definitely share that down below in the comments, and let's have a great discussion. And if you ended up enjoying this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then do consider checking out the links in the description below. For all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to interact with me in some way within Pokemon GO, like with remote raids, then do consider becoming a patron on my Patreon. But yeah, that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.